Hey tea heads, this is Don from Mayleaf. Japanese green tea is always steamed and Chinese green tea is always pan-fried. That is something that you may have heard. It's one of the key defining differences between Japanese green tea and Chinese green tea that's often talked about. So all green tea goes through what is called a kill green process or a shaching process. What that means is you're taking the freshly withered leaves and you are heating them up above a certain temperature to deactivate the enzymes in the leaf that lead to the color change, the oxidation of the tea leaves, and so the tea stays green. Very simplistic, but that's the general explanation for green teas. And it is often said that the main difference between Japanese and Chinese green teas is that the heating process to achieve that deactivation of the enzymes in Japan is done by steaming, and in China it's done by pan frying. But just like everything in tea, nothing is that simple, because you can get pan fired Japanese green teas and you can get steamed Chinese green teas. And this is the most famed of them all. This is Hubei Enshi Yulu. It's often called jade dew, which is a bit confusing because it's the same name as Gyokuro. Gyokuro is jade dew. We're calling it dawn dew just to stop any confusion there. So this is commonly talked about as sort of the Chinese version of Gyokuro, but I think that that's completely off the mark and shouldn't be really talked about. It comes from the fact that when this first was tasted in Japan, they compared it to Gyokuro, and it's like the Chinese Gyokuro. Also, it looks kind of similar in that it's that needle shape. We're going to go through some of the processing of this tea, but I want to make it clear that just like most things out there in tea, the actual process of steaming tea leaves is not something new in China. In fact, China started that process. Originally, green tea was steamed, and then they moved on to pan frying. The reason for that, probably lots, but let's just go through the main reason. The main reason is that the tastes for green tea in China moved away from purity and more into this idea of transformation. So transforming the quality of the tea, transforming this sort of fresh and vibrant leaf into something that's warmer, into something that's more complex, into something that's nuttier, that's got more variation in the notes. And if you think about the pan frying process, just like anything, if you heat something on a hot surface, you're going to get more of a toasted note. You're going to get more caramelization. It's going to take longer to achieve that kill green process because you're constantly having to move the leaves around to stop them from toasting too much. So the temperature is less sort of consistent at a certain temperature to achieve that kill green process. And so it's a longer process, usually over many stages. And so it builds layers of complexity of flavor. Whereas the steaming process is much faster, usually sort of under a minute, 50 seconds to a minute of being exposed to steam. And so therefore you tend to get a tea, big generalizations, but you know, that's all we can do in these videos. You tend to get a tea which is more representative of the purity of the leaf, less of this sort of additional changes to the flavor and the aromatics of the leaf that come through that more extended pan frying process. And you can get baked teas and you can get various different other types of teas. So I'm not going to go into all the different styles of the shaching process, but the two very clear ones are steaming, usually reserved for teas from Japan, and pan firing or pan frying, usually reserved for teas in China. So Chinese green teas back in the Tang Dynasty were steamed. And then it sort of fell out of favor. The more laborious process of pan frying took favor to create these other styles of teas, of which we are very well acquainted. For example, Longjing, Maofeng, Juyeqing, all of the classic Chinese green teas. But this is still a classic Chinese green tea. In fact, it's considered one of the top 10 famous teas of China. And it is surprising that we haven't had this tea yet in our collection. This is the first year in over 25 years that I have now sourced a Hubei Enshi Yulu. It used to be called Yulu as in jade green, but then they changed it to the Lu meaning dew. So the translation of this is jade dew, but as I said, we're calling it dawn dew. Let's quickly scope this tea and we'll try to go through some of the processing before we get into the tasting. This is the 16th of April, 2026. So that's the season. The cultivar on this is the Longjing 43 cultivar. Now there is an indigenous heirloom cultivar that's very traditional for this type of tea. And you can seek it out. It's produced in lower quantities. In my experience, it tends to exhibit too much bitterness. However, you know, that's again a big statement. Depends on the producer, depends on the terroir, depends on all of the various factors that go into tea making. But overall, I find that the Longjing 43, although it is a newer cultivar to this tea style, suits this style of steamed tea because it sort of balances out the umami and the astringency in a really beautiful way, I think. So you get a very elegant tea. The origin of this is from Enshi in Hubei in China. Picking and processing. Well, let's quickly skip to elevation just so I get that out of the way before I forget. It's around 800 meters. So picking and processing. This is picked as either buds or a very, very delicate one leaf. So you could call it bud and one leaf. I think I'll put buds, but it's sort of buds. It's sort of an interesting picking. It's, as you'll see, you can't really see them here, but when they open up, you'll see that they tend to be single, either buds or single leaves. So an interesting picking. Then it goes through a withering phase. So like all teas, they'll be left out to wither. That allows some development of flavor. And then it will be fired or it will be steamed. So the way that they do that, in Japan, most of the steaming is now mechanized. It'll usually go through a conveyor belt style sort of steaming where, you know, the conveyor belt is timed and there's a steaming area where the leaves go over so they know how long the leaves take to go over that particular steaming area. In China, the traditional way to make this tea, and this tea is made in a mechanized way sometimes, but the majority of this tea is still made in the traditional way. So it's made by steaming these leaves over hot water, over boiling water in drawers. So the leaves are laid out in drawers, and the idea is not to let the leaves touch each other too much. So you get a very even, quick steaming. You put them in these drawers, you put them on these drawers, you put the drawer into this steaming unit, and they steam for about 50 seconds, something like that. Then they're taken out. They're fanned very quickly, so they'll be put under a big fan to try to cool them and get some of the moisture away. And then after they've cooled down, so we want to sort of maintain, lock in, we don't want them to stew and, you know, potentially sort of brew up after that steaming. So after that, it will then go through some pan firing. So interestingly, there is then an element of pan firing in there, not to the same temperature as pan-fired Chinese green teas, but there will be some pan firing. And that is mostly to just sort of take away some of the residual moisture. And then it goes through a very extensive shaping phase. And this will be over certain, you know, it's not just one phase, it will go through heating and shaping and heating and shaping. And the way that it is shaped is done by hand for these high quality teas. And there's like a particular style of shaping these teas. So you get this sort of needle shape. You've got to hug it. There's sort of a hugging phase, and then there's a rubbing in one direction. So you don't rub like this, you rub in one direction, and then there's a tossing phase, and then you've got there's lots of different phases. I've not done it myself, but it is a very skilled process to do this, usually over a heated table. So there's constant moisture loss until you get something that resembles these sort of needles. Now in Japan, most of these processes for the vast majority of even the highest quality Sencha and Gyokuro will be done by machine. It's very unusual that you will get hand-rolled Gyokuros. They do exist, but it's extremely, extremely rare. So they have machines that have been built that are imitating all of the movements, the traditional movements or as best they can to create these lovely needle shapes, and you get this very uniform needle shape. This is done by hand, so you're going to get a little bit less uniformity, but you get that artisan approach to the shaping. Does that make a higher quality tea or not? I'll leave that discussion for a comparative tasting on another day. But this is all sort of laborious, takes many hours of heating and rolling and shaping. Once it's reached the right level of moisture content and the shape is right, according to the producers, it will be gently baked dry. So you've got various different heating methods here. You've got the initial steaming, then you've got sort of pan frying. Usually that might be done a couple of times, but at lower temperature, you've got shaping over heated tables, and then you've got baking. So this is very different, I would say, from your Japanese green teas. It's a very traditional tea. As I said, the original steamed teas were way back in the Tang Dynasty. And in the Qing Dynasty, this style of tea became more and more popular. And then in the sort of late 20th century, I think 1965, from my recollection, this particular process of making this particular style of steamed tea, even though steamed tea was being made before, but this particular Hubei Enshi Yulu style became sort of formalized. And then you've now got that happening. And even I was reading recently that I think a year ago or 2 years ago, they sort of created the formal, process that they're teaching to different factories of exactly how you make this Hubei Enshi Yulu. So there's even more formalization happening. So the takeaway is it's a very traditional technique that has been upgraded and has been changed and has been formalized in the last 100 years. Okay, is that all the information that you need to know about this tea? All that I care about, obviously, is what it tastes like, and you should find out why I selected this tea after so many decades now of me tasting this tea and not being that interested. And just like most of my videos, I will give you the downsides of the tea, why I tended not to pick a tea, what I see as its potential flaws according to my taste. And that often is, I'm going to sound like a broken record because you've heard me say it a lot, but often I find that there is, with this steamed tea, it can taste very clean, very fresh, but lacking richness, depth, complexity, aftertaste. Common comment that I make regarding a lot of famed Chinese green teas. Now, in Japan, how come Japanese green tea, this is an aside, but we'll go with it while this guy warms up. How come Japanese green teas, even though they are steamed, so you could apply the same criticism theoretically to Japanese green teas, yet Japanese green teas are some of the most intense, some of the most strong, some of the most impactful teas out there in terms of your initial hit of umami, sweet, and complexity. There are many reasons, but one of the key reasons is that the way that they handle shading, very controlled shading to intentionally boost the umami, and also the way they handle their soil. So fertilization to really amp up the certain compounds in the tea to really boost up the sort of compounds like umami, like catechins, like the compounds, the other amino acids, the other polysaccharides in the leaf that will lead to complexity. In China, there is more of a tendency to, again, big generalization, but overall, there's more of a tendency to let the tea leaves just be in nature and mess with them less. Yes, you're using shading, fruit trees and things like that. So you're still, the concept of shading is a concept which has gone through antiquity. We know Chinese have always considered shaded teas higher quality, but the shading is not controlled with scaffolding or gyokuro dans, or as in the case of kabusecha, where they're actually covering the bushes with cloth. Instead, it's sort of like the aspect of the mountain, how much cloud cover, fruit trees, etc. So there's more of a sort of naturalistic approach. Again, I'm not trying to, suggest that one is better than the other. They both produce teas that are representative of the terroir, and the terroir includes, in my opinion, the sort of cultural sensitivities and sensibilities of the area. Right. So the criticism with Hubei and Enshi Yulu over the decades that I have tasted it is just very fresh, nice, but I can't get behind it. Let's see if this tea now lives up to the sample and my recollection of it. You can see the look of them. I mean, they are very, are you focused? They are very, very beautiful, as you can see. Needle-like, unusual look. Okay. Yeah, because I'm getting warmth. I'm getting notes that are very similar to yellow teas, in fact. I'm getting things like granola. So toasted grains, toasted nuts. Not toasted to the level of a pan-fried. Keep on saying pan-fired or pan-fried. I say pan-fired tea. But there, warm, granola covers it. Sort of sweet, honeyed oats and nuts. A little herbal note, a little savory note. Lovage. Hay. So dried grass moving into that sun-dried, so it almost has a malty, caramelized quality to it. Some woods are very simple, like cut pine wood. So a little bit fresh, a little bit resinous, a little bit woody. That lovage is beautiful. Lovage has a savory quality to it, but it's not anywhere near the savory qualities of a Japanese Gyokuro, which is like heavy on the broth, heavy on the sort of chicken soup quality. Right, I'm gonna brew this in the Gaiwan style. A lot of people would want to brew this in the grandpa style or the top-down glass method, which means that you're putting the leaves in, you're just into a glass and you're filling up to about 70% and you're letting it just brew in the water. You're drinking and allowing the leaves to settle and fall down, and then you're just topping up with water. As the water level gets too low and the tea becomes too concentrate, you add more. That's a very classic way of brewing this tea, but I want to brew it this style because I'm used to this as my default way of discerning the aromatics of the tea. It gives me all of these stages. So here we go, smell of the wet leaf. Okay, so no getting away from the very vegetal quality of it. Not that you would want to get away from it, but oftentimes I think when I say the word vegetal, that might turn some people off. Hopefully it's not. You can see these leaves are just starting to open up. So I'm getting steamed, I'm getting like, if you've taken spinach and you've steamed it, but then you've let it cool. So it's like, it's got a freshness to it. You go to a Japanese restaurant and you get that cold spinach starter, you may know. So sort of like pressed spinach, artichoke. It's also got some of that broth and like a bean quality, like white bean soup, right? So it is very, not as savory as a Japanese green tea, but it still has that savory quality to it. A touch of wild strawberry, though, thrown in. Pumpkin seeds. So it moves a little bit into that milkier and fruitier note, but no doubt the first notes that hit you are that the sort of, you're sitting down, you're having spinach and white bean soup, with pumpkin seeds on top. It's quite comforting and savory. As it cools down, you get more of the bright notes. That's to be expected. So as it cools down, I'm getting more of the wild strawberries, that particular aromatic I'm getting dill. So it brightens up. Okay, I'm brewing at 80 degrees. You can brew this tea 80 to 90 degrees. You experiment with the temperature that suits you best. You could go down to 70 if you wanted. It's all about attenuating the bitterness according to your taste. There shouldn't be too much bitterness. And as I said, if you find this tea with the heirloom variety, it tends to have a little bit more of that hit to it in terms of bitterness, which I can get behind, but I don't know. If it doesn't transform enough, which can be the case with some of the steamed teas, like if it doesn't transform enough into sweetness, then I'm not having it. And as I said, this is one of China's top 10 famous teas. I don't know who creates those lists and how often they're updated, because it seems like a bit of a dinosaur, but you'll see it being mentioned. One of China's top 10 teas. The color of the leaves, beautiful dark emerald green. The color of the liquor, beautiful bright clear green. This is all about the green. Come on. Now that is reminiscent to me of a Japanese green tea. That sort of almost luminous vibrancy. Okay, here we go. Enshi Yulu from Hubei, and we're calling it Dawn Dew. Cheers. As the rain comes down here in London. Purity, but not emptiness. Purity with depth. That is the goal, I think, for these kinds of teas. And this has that. So when it first hits your mouth, you get like this slightly like dewy, like dew, rainwater, stream freshness that also has like a saline quality to it. So like it's like almost like you've added some like electrolytes. So it moves into that slightly savory note, but it's still very pure. It still feels very like, yeah, like you've transformed the water with nature into what you would imagine the rain dripping off the leaves would taste like. Very pure, but with something else there. And then you have that umami developing. The soil in Hubei is very selenium rich. I've done a video about selenium rich orchid mist, so you can look that up. But that means that it contributes to more of that amino acid quality. Savory, umami, but then it moves into a particular kind of plant sugar sweetness that is very, very unique to this umami transformation. Okay, let's just try to describe that. So I'm getting dew, I'm getting like streams, I'm getting, I don't want to say sea air because that's too salty, but something like reminiscent of that. I'm getting that dill syrup. Yep, dill syrup. Sweet, but plant-like. I'm getting those pumpkin seeds. I'm getting the warmth that I was smelling on the dry leaf. I'm getting, but it's like warm meadows. Like it's almost like it's very difficult to isolate it to a plant or a fruit or a flower. It's like, imagine you went to the top of a mountain on a very like hot summer's day and you just smelt the air. So the grass has become yellowed. There is some floral notes, but it's sort of like wild flowers just in the background. It's the subtlety of it, but then, you know, through that subtlety, you've also got the complexity of lots of difference rather than something singular, like, oh, that's a rose or that's an orchid. It's just sort of like meadowy, right? It just is reminiscent of location rather than thing. So yeah, this is very location. It's like you going to the top of a very pure mountain air. There's mountain streams, there's hot summer meadows. It's extremely transportive in that way. And it means that there's not going to be like any particular flavor notes that I can pick out. And the criticism that I talked about before is sometimes it can be too empty. It can be just too much like the air and not actually like have richness. But this has richness, but it's very difficult for me to pick anything out. I still can only describe location. Does that make sense? I'm getting pumpkin seeds. I'm getting, see, I'm trying to find it. I'll get there. I'm getting those little wild strawberry hits as well. Those creamier fruits, like papaya to melons, you know, those kinds of fleshy, creamy fruits that are still fresh and juicy, but have like a creaminess. Let's say green melon. Yeah, green melon. Cantaloupe, green melon, papaya, but more green melon, a little bit crisper. And the finish is very nice. The finish is reminiscent like of a wine-like finish, like those crisp white wines. And again, if you picked a tea, an Enshi Yulu that was more from the indigenous heirloom varieties, then I think that can come with a bit too much aggression. This is like the archetypal version of what you would want crisp to mean, right? It's got a quench, it's got a brightness, it's got a juiciness, right? It feels crisp and dry, but in a lovely white wine kind of way. And it leaves me with this very enduring, long and juicy, again, green melon sweetness. This is a tea about purity, but it has richness and complexity. We'll brew it one more time, and I want to show you these leaves as they've opened up. And then I will chuck this in a glass and just keep reinfusing, because the true quality of these leaves will shine out through its longevity. Now, I am already, interestingly, picking up a noticeable perky little energy here. Kind of interesting. I wasn't expecting that, but I am already, after one infusion, picking up a definite altered state. Almost reminiscent of some Japanese green teas. In fact, quite reminiscent of like a Gyokuro. Not maybe as theanine hit, but still kind of close. So there is clearly potency within all of the elegance and purity. Wow, yeah. I wasn't quite prepared for this to be a caffeinated day or a perky day, because I have still got, I don't know, about 40 or 50 teas to try today. But here we are. Cheers, everybody. Yeah, so, you know, it's reminiscent of some of the Japanese qualities of a Japanese green tea. It's also reminiscent of some of the qualities of a yellow tea. like Hoshan Huangya, Amber Mountain. So warm, rounded, soft, but it's got this crispness to it that's different. And it's also reminiscent a little bit of a Anji Bai Cha, Jade Arrow, or a Huangshan Maofeng. So more of these delicate teas, like Huangshan Maofeng we call Fir Peak. So I rattled off a lot of names, but let's just sort of go through them. Huangshan Maofeng, Fir Peak from Anhui province, whole leaf, not rolled too much, not messed with too much, has more of a pure taste. Anji Bai Cha, Jade Arrow, also similar, albeit a little bit warmer and nuttier. Amber Mountain, aka Hoshan Huangya, another Anhui tea, which again has a rounded, rich, warm quality to it. So all of those teas, if you like those teas, you're going to love this tea. The addition to this is a certain crispness, not bitterness, not too much astringency, a certain crispness, certain sort of cloudy, misty crispness that you don't get with those teas. Dewy, Dawn Dew works. Now let's take a look at these leaves. And then I'll smell the empty Gongdao Bay, total overfill. But I want to smell this. Let's smell this first. Yeah. Let it cool down a bit because I'm getting a lot of the steaminess of it. Right, let's try and pick one out. You see there's like single buds and leaves, single. It's not the one bud, one leaf normal sort of set that you get. These are individual pluckings that don't usually have much of a set about them. They are individual. So an interesting plucking. This is 16th of April. So this is pre-rain tea. Sometimes this tea will be on the market as after that, which is, what is it called? Pre-grain tea. With these calendars. I don't pay that much attention to it, but it's a slightly earlier picking than a lot of teas out there. I was going to smell this. Yeah, much better. Okay, now, whoa, okay. I'm picking up lilies, like very distinct, sweet caramelization as well, like cooked sugar lilies and melon and wild strawberries. And like, yeah, just a very light caramel toffee note. Wonderful. I will leave you here. Dawn Dew. Traditionally called Jade Dew, but that's confusing because so is Gyokuro. A very traditional steamed Chinese green tea that is one of the famed teas that is finally on the Mayleaf shelves. That's it, tea heads. Check out other videos, taste our teas wherever you're in the world by browsing mayleaf.com and come visit us if you're ever in London. Other than that, I am a sprightly Don from Mayleaf. Thank you for being a part of the revelation of true tea. Stay away from those tea bags. Keep drinking the good stuff and spread the word because nobody deserves bad tea. Bye.